The meatballs are super savory, they're really flavorful. They're great with the slightly acidic marinara sauce, and then the cheese. Everything together is a super comforting combo. Hey, it's Bree here from Evergreen Kitchen, and today we're gonna cook a recipe from my brand new cookbook, Evergreen Kitchen Weeknight Vegetarian Dinners for Everyone. Today I'll show you how to make the meatless meatballs with garlic bread. I love this recipe because it's full of veggies. You can make a huge batch, keep it in the fridge during the week. You can freeze any extras, and you can serve them with marinara sauce and garlic bread, which is usually our go-to, or serve it with spaghetti and meatballs, or add it to a sandwich and make something like a meatball sub, or whatever else you'd like. For this recipe, the ingredients you'll need are cremini mushrooms, or white mushrooms work fine too. You'll need yellow onion, some eggplant, and some Italian parsley. For seasonings, we'll use salt, pepper, oregano, and then olive oil, as well as some tamari, and also nutritional yeast. For the binder, it's just panko breadcrumbs and quick oats. If you're gluten-free, you can use gluten-free panko breadcrumbs. And for serving, marinara sauce and Parmesan or vegan parm. So you'll start with a pound of mushrooms. So the point here is just to chop them into small pieces. We're gonna put it in the broiler to help just eliminate some of the moisture in the vegetables and also get them to start getting some browning for flavor. When I put them on the baking sheet, I wouldn't bother lining this baking sheet with parchment paper just because parchment paper is usually only good up to 425, so broiling would usually be too hot for parchment. So this recipe calls for 1 cup of onion and then 8 ounces, or the equivalent of about 2.5 cups of peeled and diced eggplant. A lot of times your onion and your eggplant might be larger than that, but I do recommend going by the amounts listed in the recipe just to make sure that the meatballs aren't overly wet or overly dry. So use a measuring cup for this part. The mushrooms are by weight. You don't have to do perfect cuts on all these veggies because they will eventually go into the food processor when it's time to make the meatballs. So 1 cup of yellow onion, and then peeled and diced eggplant, about 2.5 cups. So now we have our mushrooms, our onions, and our eggplant. We're also going to roast some garlic at the same time. And because it's going in at a high heat with the rest of the vegetables, we're gonna keep the cloves with the skin on to help protect them, and also wrap them in a bit of tin foil. Just put the tin foil on the baking sheet, and we'll need 5 cloves of garlic. And then we're gonna drizzle olive oil over the cloves of garlic as well as all of the veg. Just use your fingertips to kind of rub the oil around the garlic cloves, and then just fold this up like a little package or envelope, and then tuck that into the side. And then with the remaining vegetables, just use your hands and toss the veggies in that olive oil, and then sprinkle with salt, and then we'll transfer it to the oven. Your baking sheet will be pretty packed at this point, but the veggies will shrink down as they cook. Sprinkle with the salt. So now that we have our mushrooms, our onions, our eggplant, and our garlic tossed in olive oil and sprinkled with salt, we're gonna just pop it into the oven. Because the oven's on broil, most ovens, broilers are on the top, so we're gonna put this on the top shelf for about 8 to 12 minutes. Keep an eye on them and check on it halfway through because boiler times vary. So the recipe calls for Italian parsley, which is my personal favorite, but you could use curly parsley if you prefer. I just find the flavor of Italian parsley to be a little bit stronger, which I like. For this recipe, you'll need 1/4 cup of finely chopped parsley for inside the meatballs, and then you can keep extra for garnish at the end. You mostly want the leaves here, but if you get a bit of stem, that's totally cool too. So the veggies are done broiling. What you're looking for is some browning on the edges of the veggies, and also that the veggies have shrunk significantly. So if you'll remember when we first put them on the pan, it almost seemed overcrowded, but now that they've had their first broil, a lot of the moisture has dissipated and we're starting to get some flavor developing with the browning. So that's exactly what we want. So what you'll want to do is open up the tin foil and let the garlic start to cool down because it'll be really hot. And while that happens, we'll transfer the roasted onions, eggplant, and mushrooms, so everything else on the sheet tray, into a food processor. I usually find the combination of the oil and then the moisture from the veggies means that I don't get any sticking on the baking sheet. But if you do, just scrape off some of those brown bits, which will be extra flavorful, and add them to the food processor as well. If there's any excess moisture on the baking sheet, don't bother adding that because it'll just make the meatballs too moist. So once you've scraped the mushrooms, onions, and eggplant into the food processor, we're gonna add some of the remaining ingredients. So we're gonna add the quick oats, the chopped parsley, and the nutritional yeast, as well as the oregano and black pepper. When the garlic is cool enough to handle, just be careful because it'll be pretty warm. Then we'll want to peel the garlic and use a fork to smash it up into a paste. Depending on how big your garlic cloves are, it might completely dissolve or require a little bit of pressing. Either is fine, you're just aiming to get a head start on the garlic so it doesn't taste raw inside of the meatballs. So once you have your garlic mashed into a paste, you'll add it to the food processor, and this will help make sure that the garlic gets evenly distributed. Now we're going to pulse it until it's almost fully pulverized, but not yet a paste. So we'll show you what that looks like, but what you want to look for is still some visible flecks of parsley inside. It doesn't take very long. You just want to pulse it until all the ingredients are incorporated, and you should still be able to see some small flecks of parsley, so it's not fully a paste yet. And then what we'll do is we'll add the breadcrumbs, the panko breadcrumbs, as the final step, and then just pulse those until they're evenly distributed. For shaping the meatballs, you can do it by hand. I like to recommend using like a retractable ice cream scoop. About 3 tablespoons is the size you're going for, which is kind of golf ball size. And I do recommend lining the baking sheet with parchment paper to prevent sticking. If you don't have a retractable ice cream scoop and you're using your hands, then you might want to occasionally just wet your hands, which will help prevent the mixture from sticking to them. After you've portioned out the meatballs, then you can use wet hands to roll them into a completely round ball, because if you use a scoop, the bottom side will be flat. If you don't care about that, you can skip that. And the final step, once you've rolled your meatballs, is to brush them generously with olive oil. Don't skip on this step because it helps to get the meatballs golden brown when they're baking in the oven at 425. I recommend using a pastry brush or a silicone brush to brush the oil all over the meatballs instead of trying to drizzle them just out of the bottle. This way you'll get a much more even coating on the meatballs and you'll probably end up using less oil in the end. It'll look like a fair bit of olive oil, but don't skip on this step because the olive oil adds flavor. If you're cooking with meat, that ground meat would typically have a lot of fat in it. And because these are completely meatless and we're cooking with onions and mushrooms and eggplant, you do need to add some of that fat for flavor, and that's what the olive oil does here. So once the meatballs have been brushed with olive oil, you're gonna pop them in an oven that's set to 425 degrees Fahrenheit until they're crispy and golden brown. That should take about 25 to 30 minutes on the top rack. While the meatballs bake, I'm gonna do a quick garlic bread. This part is totally optional, but it's always really good for dipping in extra marinara sauce. So the recipe calls for a demi baguette, which just means a small or like half-size baguette. At the store, we only could get like the full size, so I'm just gonna cut it in half and go from there. Then the other ingredients you need is just garlic cloves, salt, and olive oil. Super simple. The recipe calls for 3 garlic cloves. These ones are really big, so I'm just gonna use 2. You can use your own discretion. And then all you want to do is peel them and sprinkle salt over top and use a fork to mash them into a paste. So once you have the garlic basically mashed into this really fragrant, almost like paste, you can transfer it into a bowl and we're gonna mix it with olive oil. This will help to make the olive oil taste super flavorful and garlicky without needing to cook it down or anything like that. So about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and then just mix it together. And you'll have this really fragrant garlicky olive oil that we will brush on the cut sides of the bread. It's like a pretty generous amount of olive oil that goes on this because don't want to skimp on olive oil when it comes to garlic bread. So if you're using a brush, naturally it'll pick up probably more of the olive oil than it will for the garlic, which is totally fine. Just make sure you use up all the olive oil to get into all the nooks and crannies, and then dab on all of the garlic on top so you don't lose any of that flavor. Now you'll just put the garlic bread in on the bottom shelf because the meatballs are on the top shelf for 5 to 7 minutes or until golden brown. So this is what you're looking for the garlic bread, where it's crispy on the edges but still soft in the middle. It's perfect for dipping this way. So you know the meatballs are done when they're deeply browned on the outside. They should still have a little bit of give to them when you touch them. And then basically let them cool slightly and you're ready to serve. I like to just heat up some of my favorite marinara sauce, add it to the bottom of a shallow dish, top them with as many meatballs as you'd like, and then garnish with Parmesan cheese or vegan parm. I like to use lots. Fresh chopped parsley, and then serve with the garlic bread for dipping. I love making this dish on fall and winter evenings. It's super cozy, really satisfying. The tomato sauce is bright. We just use our favorite jarred store-bought sauce to save time. And then you have these really savory veggie-packed meatballs and the crisp garlic bread. It's such a good combo. You can totally pair it with spaghetti or add it into sandwiches to mix it up for the week. But to be honest, most of the time, this is how we serve it because it just totally hits the spot. So once your meatballs are formed, brushed with olive oil, now you're gonna pop them in a 425 onion.